And hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I'm Rick Zanotti, and today I am joined by Harold Muliati. He is co-hosting today. He's also running the video switcher. Our lovely Miss Lesley Price could not make it today. She had some other compromises and commitments, and normally this is one of our show dates. So we will see her tomorrow on another show, another eLearnChat we're doing this week. Today we have a great guest, old friend. We've known him for years, a guy that we love and respect, and he's back. And in fact, you know, we did a small interview. We'll show a couple of seconds of it here. We did an interview with him at DevLearn, and it was always great to see him. This is...
And you can go below to the link below and check out those interviews if you like. So let's get going.
Dr. Allen Partridge. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com, your training and video partner.
Hello, I'm Peter Baker. Please visit voiceovermasterclass.com to see details of the training courses I have on offer for new and existing voice talents to further their career by enhancing voice and technical skills, as well as essential marketing tips. And we are back and in that center position of power. There he is. We've got Dr. Allen Partridge. Allen, how are you?
I am well. It's good to see you, Rick. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, no, we love having you on. And you know, we were talking at DevLearn. There's been a snafu in communication between you, us, and scheduling. And somehow for about 3 years, we hadn't seen you. And go, he doesn't love us anymore. We still love him. But I don't know. We had no idea what happened. But we saw each other at DevLearn. It was great to catch up and always fun. And you told us some stuff that was just real interesting. Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about Sensei and other stuff later on, which I found really fascinating. But you had an announcement to make. There, you know, like you were saying pre-show, people are always asking, do you have any openings at Adobe? You do. You do now.
Yeah, we absolutely do. We're looking for a learning evangelist that will be focused on Adobe Captivate Prime, our LMS. So it's a full-on evangelist position, which are, you know, as you know, very coveted positions, and that person will be taking the helm and guiding and steering things in terms of evangelism for Captivate Prime, which has been just growing like crazy. And we're looking for that perfect person, somebody who's great with people, knows the community, knows their background in talent, learning development, HR, someone who's obviously aware of the kinds of things that are necessary in social media and speaking, public speaking. We're looking for that, you know, that rare unicorn to come on board and join the team.
That sounds great. And I think we're going to have a show link below of how to get in touch with you or on that.
Yeah, we have the link to the position
It'll be in the
video description.
That sounds great. And if you don't know a lot about the Adobe Evangelists, at least the ones that we work with, everyone's just great. They're really nice people to work with. They're knowledgeable. And you know what? I'll put the keyword on nice. Not knowledgeable, you know, everybody can be knowledgeable, but nice people who are knowledgeable, that's a tough one. And I mean, Pooja, for example, Pooja Jai Singh, one of the evangelists, she's great. She's great. Allen, right here. We're only saying that because he's here. We talk really badly about. No, I'm just kidding. Allen's great. You know, we've worked with Allen.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and so are you. I mean, I've seen you at the shows and the kind of stuff you do. And a lot of people may not know this about you, but Allen was involved. He was a professor. He did a lot of interesting research and development on things like you were doing things with Second Life before anybody else was. You were doing e-learning and other stuff. You were creating virtual worlds. You were doing all sorts of really cool things before anybody knew what that was.
Yeah, I have a long tail history with all of those things. I got interested in Adobe Director in my earliest kind of tip the toe in the waters. My dad was an old IBM guy, so he did what they called field service engineering, which basically meant when computers were so big that an electrician would walk inside and actually service the machine and swap out the resistors and things like that. That was my dad. That's what he did. And so we had computers in my home from the time I was little, and I was always interested, but I was very interested in art. And the funny thing is, for viewers who remember the early days of art and computers, it was very frustrating. So I would generally try and find the newest, fastest, flashiest computer that I possibly could and put graphic software on it. And then I would promptly fry that computer in horrible and tragic ways. And fortunately, I was in a university kind of space, so I managed to escape without much notice. But I did terrible things to those computers over and over. So it wasn't until, I was doing my doctoral studies in the late 90s that finally I was able to find software that would allow me to really tinker and play and do some programming. And that was Adobe Director. And then at that point, Director introduced 3D, which was amazing. And I just went nuts with it. I remember the early programming experiences. There were probably 100 basic commands that you could do in Director before 3D, and then there were about 700 new commands after 3D. And I geeked out on it. I went insanely deep, really fast. Wrote a big book on it. Had such a good time, and then went on to do a bunch of 3D things, including I worked on a book for a company called Massive Software. Which is Peter Regalis is an absolute genius who came up with this methodology for combining fuzzy logic and 3D geometry and motion capture. And the net result was the Lord of the Rings, all the extra sequences and things like that. They needed a way to mass generate these giant crowds of people in battle. But New Zealand, where they were filming, didn't even have the 10,000 people they needed for extras. So they simulated the whole thing using this kind of cool little software package that Regulus gave a kind of naughty name to. And I don't know whether I'm allowed to say it in this context. So I'll just tell you, he called it Little Blanks. And then eventually they called it Massive. They used it for everything from Penguins in Batman to Lord of the Rings movies to now it's used all the time. And I helped out with some of the early documentation for that because earlier 3D geometry and motion capture, if you were going to use those kind of things, you would sort of move people's limbs one at a time, all the little elements one at a time. And that's how animators worked. But this software allowed them to use fuzzy logic, which is a kind of math variation where the rules get more like language. Something's far away, near me, very near me, and those things become triggers. And so teaching animators how to animate with that kind of logical brain became a really cool kind of side project. And then I went on, and as you said, I did a bunch of stuff in Second Life and virtual reality there, which was a lot of fun. Developed a game engine inside there. We were sort of exploring, what could be done. And we've done a bunch of 3D stuff over the years, kind of getting there. And now, of course, Captivate has a 360 VR functionality, which is fun to have around too.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Well, the very first time you were on the show, which is 10 or 11 years ago, if you can believe it, it's been that long.
Wow.
You were showing some of the digital art you painted, and you are really quite a gifted painter. I remember that. And you said it took months and months to build some of these or to paint some of these. It was fascinating. I honestly didn't think you could even do that in Photoshop. And I was going, wow, that. And you're a very good painter. You're actually quite talented in that area. You. Not just 3D and all the other fun stuff you do, but your 2D paintings were gorgeous. The landscapes and the people and everything. It was just very, very pretty. So are you still doing that?
That's very kind. I do it less and less. I haven't had as much time to paint. I have done quite a few, but over the past few years, I've been pretty heavily hit with all the other requirements for things.
Work and travel.
I have been writing. I've actually been writing a lot lately, though. I wrote 3 books, and of course a lot of articles and things. But now I've gotten more serious about writing. I'm writing a science fiction novel, so
nice.
that's well underway. Hopefully, at some point, I'll launch my hobby unto the masses.
That's pretty cool. Hey, if you ever, I don't know if you ever read him, but are you familiar with Richard Phillips?
No.
He is a science fiction writer. He wrote The Roe Conspiracy, RHO. It's a series of about 9 books. They're great. We had him on the show, not this show, but a show called Life Edge, where we've had a lot of writers and authors. And this one, and we'll put you on Life Edge when you get your book out. We'll bring you on. You can promote it.
I'd love that.
But he has written some of the best science fiction. Him and A.G. Riddle both have done very good science fiction stories. A.G. Riddle did the Atlantis Prophecy or the Atlantis trilogy. They're amazing. I mean, the imagination is like, holy smoke. But Richard Phillips did a whole thing about, and he's a nuclear physicist. For real. He worked at Los Alamos for many years, and he's done a whole mess of other work with the, I think he was Air Force. He's done a lot of work with computers and quantum computing and all sorts of fun stuff. And like he says, I put things in my books that are real or coming, but I can't talk about it. Because he's got top secret clearances. So he goes, but let's just say that a lot of what you're seeing in the books, you may see in the real world one day, but I can't say. So it's fascinating. If you like science fiction, you'll probably love it. Richard Phillips, The Roe Conspiracy, or The Roe Agenda, I think it's called. Just fun books. I've read all of them.
Check that out.
And they were just great. What kind of science fiction are you writing? What's your subject matter?
Well, I mean, it's essentially, the first piece is actually mostly a kind of a coming of age story, and its genre is problematic to pin down at this point. So it's I suppose you would describe it as dystopian.
Yes.
Meets kind of world transformation kind of events. That sort of thing. Yeah.
That should be fun.
Given your background with virtual reality and stuff like that, and the fact that you mentioned dystopian, am I right in assuming it's going to explore transhumanist themes and that sort of thing?
I think that's absolutely fair to say, but probably not in the same way that you mean, right? So rather than being a sort of cyber journey, transhumanist in the sense of catastrophic change kind of thing. I'm really heavily influenced by, of all things, I don't know if you're familiar with a genre called lit RPG. Lit RPG is a very strange genre. It's almost like a sort of throwback to the films from the 40s and 50s where you'd have a cliffhanger ending and it would be a serial. You'd come to the next serial, the next serial. So these are very serial, kind of popcorny adventures, but they all follow sort of similar themes of seeing the world through a different lens or experiencing things. And usually they relate to what we think of as a game, that kind of thing. But I'm ironically not writing in that genre. So I'm just telling you that I'm influenced by it, but I'm not. That's not the genre.
That was a great genre too. That whole 40s, 50s. Some of the best movies and stuff came out of that. I love some of the stuff out of that. Not only the writing, but the movies and very interesting things. And like you said, there were a lot of coming of age movies. I don't know if you ever saw the original Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power. That was kind of a coming of age movie. A World War I veteran comes back. He's part of high society, even though he's not really part of it. He has a girlfriend or fiance who is. But he's driven by another goal. He wants to find himself. He wants to help humanity somehow. He's seen the worst of humanity killing itself to pieces, and he becomes not a beatnik. What was it? There's another word. When he goes to France, he goes to France to learn more about life, to become more artistic, to learn more about it. And then from there he goes to India, and he basically becomes a guru. He learns healing. He learns how to find himself and everything. And he comes back, and the world is a different place for him. And he's more of a healer and changer of people. And it ends. They could have made a sequel, but they didn't. They just it's almost like a cliffhanger. He leaves. You go, where's he going? Yeah. and they never really.
What's that?
Yeah, wonderful book. Oh yeah, let me know if you ever want somebody to help you proof it. Send it my way. I'd love to help you.
I might take you up on that. Often people are reluctant.
No, that's only when you get ready. If you want, just aside from publisher or whatever else. I love proofing stuff like that, and I've read quite a few books that I've proofed for other people, and I think it's fun.
That's awesome.
So that's cool. Well, hey, congratulations. I know you're going to do well at it because I know you're a good writer, and you've got a darn good imagination. So this is going to be fun. See, now you've already piqued our interest.
We'll see. I'm still skeptical.
Nah, we have faith in you.
That's what takes me so long. Actually, is that I'm constantly self-critical. It's like
I've written 35 books, of which I've never finished any of them, never published a one because I couldn't stand where I was going with them. So I know how you feel.
Don't do that.
I just got to I just got to finish one. I've had some that were pretty interesting. It wasn't right. And you're right. I was younger then. I was way too critical of everything I did. I was like, no, that's not good. That's not good. Just got to do it. It's not that. So
I think so.
Oh, man, I can't wait to see what you're doing and read it, man. You never know. It might become a movie.
That it's entirely unlikely.
Yeah, unlikely. Hey, you never know. But hey, when we met last time in Vegas at the eLearn show, you were talking about Sensei. Sensei is the artificial, the AI, I guess, technology behind not only parts of the e-learning group, but other groups. It's kind of a centralized AI for all of what Adobe's doing. Now, that to me was fascinating. And one of the questions I didn't ask you then, probably because we were running quickly, is does Sensei have an API that developers can use within some of the products? It does.
It does. Yeah. It's extraordinary. So there's a program that you can directly reach out to Adobe, to the Sensei team. And if you've got an AI problem, they'll route it through a team of computer scientists they have there who will discuss it. We'll try to make sure that, because there's also this sort of phenomena where we think of everything under the sun and we think that that's sort of AI. People all the time are telling me, oh, well, I've got this thing. And I'm like, no, what you have there is actually a decision tree. It's not an AI. It's not machine learning. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the kind of thing that you would want an AI engine for. So there is a program, and they go through a pretty rigorous screening process to kind of help guide people in. And then they also guide people once they're in to try and help them develop these projects that are compatible. It's a very unusual AI and machine learning solution in that, unlike most AI today, which is all going to be either mechanical or numerical data crunching or be natural language processing, Sensei is a trained expert on visual information. So Sensei is good at seeing things artificially and then drawing conclusions and coming to realizations and making those comparisons. So you could kind of say it has a language that it's analyzing, but the language is visual design.
So in essence, with visual design, Sensei's a master of pattern recognition.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Which is how we see, how we process everything in our brains, which is fascinating.
Exactly. And some of the things that are already out there in live software today that people are using on a regular basis, it's actually going in and looking at photographic images as you take them. If you put your photographs into Lightroom, then that Lightroom will trigger Sensei, which looks at your picture and starts cataloging and identifying the things in the picture, and then meta tags the photo for you. So when you do a search on your machine, it already knows that you were in the picture, that your dog was in the picture, that there's a cat in the picture, what color the dog is, what color the cat is, whether it's this thing or that thing. It knows a frightening amount of things about those images, and then it goes next step, right? So one of the explorations I've seen with Sensei does things like maps starfield density in images of the night sky, right? So you want to picture the night sky, but do you want a picture with a dense starfield? Do you want a very limited starfield? Do you want bright color formations? Do you want darker sky? Do you want, and all of that can be shifted and transitioned, and you can just blend through, move through, and merge through thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of images. It's also used on Adobe Stock. So if you've searched Adobe Stock and tried to figure out how the heck, when I type yellow flower, red center, can this thing instantly deliver that to me? That's all Sensei.
In
That's
your
interesting.
example with Lightroom, how do you take advantage of that meta tagging it does? Do you search in Bridge or something? Where would you?
Yeah, I think you can search through Bridge. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and pull up all the data. It's a good example for the e-learning space as well, right? Because think of the implications. Like think of how often people are coming and saying, "Well, I've got ADA 508 compliance from my e-learning tool, but it doesn't know anything about the image, so it just puts it up as image 47." And now you've got to go in and do all of the work. You have to figure out, what is that image? How am I going to describe it? What's in the image? What would a person who sees the world differently need to know about that particular image? And it becomes a lot of extra labor if you have hundreds or thousands of images. But imagine a world where you could search based on those key ideas, where images could be presented to you based on that, and where they'd already be pre-tagged for WCAG and 508 and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of implications, and they go across a broad range. And then what's cool about machine learning is, keep in mind, it's constantly learning, right? So it's constantly doing a comparative analysis of how people react, and then it's aggregating the data and coming to better and better conclusions over time.
Does Sensei use things like computational photography to determine things as well? Because that's becoming very popular, especially in the smartphone industry. But now we're seeing that computational photography is also heading out to cameras. For example, the Olympus EMX, I think, 1X, something like that. It's their new, bigger Micro Four Thirds camera. It uses computational photography to enhance images on a real camera with real lenses. And I'm thinking, that may also be a part of what Sensei, I'm not sure, but it could actually figure out things computationally from what it's seeing.
I'm sure that theoretically there are some potentials there. I'm not remembering a specific example that I've seen so far.
And it's all
although
new.
I've seen several examples that have just been sort of jaw droppers that that really blow your mind in terms of what they can do. And then Sensei, of course, can also do natural language processing and other kinds of functions. So that's how we ended up using it in Captivate Prime.
Well, I was going to ask you now, in Captivate proper, if let's say you're doing scenario-based training, in the old days, and still today, a lot of us have to create a dialogue. You have to create, people either get voiceover for it, but it's all decision tree. Based on what you're saying, you're just branching to something logical, and you have limited branching ability, let's say. But if you have true natural language processing, and you could somehow program in a more dynamic result table of what you want, now you're at the point where the AI element could actually have a conversation with you as quote unquote, let's say a customer service rep trying to figure something out. That could be very exciting for training, because not only would you have to do less development of scenarios, because the scenario in essence could kind of develop itself to a point.
Right.
Anything like that?
You're hitting on the kind of thing that I think is really huge in terms of potential moving forward.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of key aspects to that we need to see sorted. One is, and I've been saying this for a while now, the granularity, the level of granularity of self-reporting of courses and information in the industry it needs a universal standard. Yeah. So the leaders in the industry in terms of authoring need to come together. They need to butt heads and make some decisions about what kind of core language could be used to encode critical information about content. Think about it this way. When you create a piece of content, let's say that it's slide based, or maybe it's web page based, or maybe it's just that you've clustered an image and a caption together or something like that. The systems of the future will need to be able to do a granular search and retrieve that information as separate components. in order to think about future augmented reality, that kind of thing. You'll want to search and be able to get aggregated content and sift through it and quickly isolate the specific element that you're interested in. And to do that, we need to be able to meta tag on a level that it surpasses tagging individual images or individual items. We need to get to a level that we can say, I'm going to define these 2-3 cogs as integrally related. Maybe it's a caption, an image, and a small article. And those need to have all of their critical information brought back. Now, some of that we can use AI, like mining through the information that a person has typed up about it, and perhaps offering that information about other places where that information has come up. But there are all kinds of issues that will arise along the way. Like if you're working for IBM and the other one's working for Microsoft and the other one's working for Cisco, they may very much be interested in preventing anyone from any of those other organizations from gaining or benefiting from that kind of stuff. But there are also opportunities for all of us in learning to kind of begin to leverage these ideas and push forward. And then the other aspect is that automation is so critical to where we are right now. I think if we think about where we are compared to being ready for full-blown machine learning in e-learning space, we're on what I would think of as the automation curve. So we're trying to make it so that as often as possible, a step which is redundant or that could be performed automatically better, that step is anticipated and performed for you so that it accelerates your ability and decreases the amount of time required. I heard a question.
Makes sense. It's almost like with an LMS, you have a standard that everybody's following. And for the most part, everybody follows it, give or take. But most LMSs are somewhat compatible. Not always, but they're at least somewhat compatible. You can't usually just take your data from one to another and it works perfectly. Sometimes it does, but when you export XML out, you gotta get it right.
Gotta match those fields. Yeah,
that's right. But I'm thinking what you're talking about is almost like a visual lexicon of possibilities, because it's a little bit different when you start getting into the learning, the cognitive part of it, which is probably more mechanical. You see it, you do something with it, but what do you do in your brain with it? How do you analyze what you just got? How, if you look at the way our eyes, for example, see, you've got 3 different, I think, receptors before it even gets to the one that says, there's an old analogy that, for example, if you see a hose just rolled up on the floor, you walk by it and you go, the initial brain reaction is a little primordial. It's snake. Danger. Snake. Maybe it's a snake. That's the first thought, but it's fuzzy. It's not even a clear image. The second receptor, I think it's V2 or whatever they call it, now is a little clearer, and you're going, well, maybe it's not a snake, but what is it? And by the third receptor, which is now the main receptor, which goes into the cortex and says, clear image, that's a hose. But and this happens in more than thousandths of a second. It's that quick. And yet imagine what a computer could do with that same information randomly, with random things that could come at you, because life comes at us somewhat randomly, but we're very good at pattern recognition. And it's amazing how fast we can recognize and record something and remember it. But so I'm thinking in the e-learning thing, whether it's, and natural language is probably one of the easiest things for e-learning because so much is based on how you respond to something. But on the other hand, so much is based on how we program it to answer a question, right or wrong. And it's right now it's sort of stupid, simple decision tree. If you say this, you have this option, that option. Which one do you take? And how does the brain remember? And that's where I think e-learning's been the worst. Most organizations are too busy worrying about lawsuits and being politically correct rather than worrying about emotions. And how the brain remembers anything that's emotional will be remembered by the brain. If there's no emotion carried in it, it's gone. We won't remember it. It has almost no impact to our brains. The way our hypothalamus, our cortex, everything works, it'll be ignored. It's like, throw it out. So imagine if we can start putting that emotion through AI, through some of the patterns that it's matching into responses that you're getting interactively live, if you will. that's where I see if we could do that. And I haven't seen great examples yet. I've seen some. I mean, that's the future. I think not too far. Maybe by next year we'll be there. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's a good observation, and you're right that the more that we can provide something that's a little richer in terms of the emotional intelligence experience as a whole, it's going to clearly relate better. I also continue to hold that the closer the learning is to the experience that the learner has when they're actually performing a task or practicing a behavior, the more likely it is that that's going to hold long term, that it's going to be a deep memory. I think there are also patterns to keep in mind. That I just finished doing a kind of a tour going around the country and talking to people who are developing learning, and the results were at once both a little alarming and very eye-opening. When I did the same sort of exercise about 5 years ago, people would tell me that they typically spend 2 to 3 days on an e-learning course. When I did this exercise this year, people told me that if they're being honest, they're lucky to get a day for a new course.
I
asked them, the whole thing.
Okay.
And I asked them, okay, what's the lifespan? What is the actual lifespan of that course? And several of them reported back that they were facing a reality where the lifespan of a course they create is typically 30 days.
30 days. That's a lot of change.
That's a lot of change. I mean, you think about it, these are all consistent with the predictions we've known for ages, that there would be this ever escalating trail, but it influences people in subtle ways. I was very interested to hear how they handled like application capture, right? Yeah. And what I found is almost to the one, in the olden days, we would do a demo, we'd do a training practice area, and then we'd do a test kind of area, right? And almost to a one, they've stopped doing the other two. They only do demo. Yeah. Because in 30 days, this thing is dead. So they're now in this sort of drive the information as fast as possible. So I think it presents us with some challenges that go way beyond rapid e-learning challenges and into automation challenges that recognize patterns that we have consistently used and almost become a kind of digital assistant who is trying to provide you with better functionality based on what little information you do input. And there are a lot of potential starting points there, right? So think about the reliance we as an industry have on learning objectives. We value learning objectives. Even now, when people are so pressed, they still will tend to write learning objectives to define what it is they're going to do with that course. A learning objective language is incredibly narrow. Think about what we define as active verbs. The number of active verbs that we associate with Bloom's taxonomy is actually quite a narrow pool. Well, there are things that we can do with that information that the computer can learn to do quite quickly. And that it probably could benefit from both automation and from decision trees and even from machine learning if it understood exactly what was happening. And then I think there are also sacred cows that are breaking our industry right now. So here's what I mean. Right now, when we produce something using a typical authoring tool, the business side of the authoring companies don't want to deal with the reality that people see the future as one where data is transmitted transparently and data is stored as a kind of an aggregate assumption. And so think of all the interactions that we have today that dominate the industry, multiple choice tests and so forth and so on, all that kind of thing. They're all kind of curtailed down to those things which fit in a SCORM definition. Right. If it doesn't fit in a SCORM definition, then suddenly it's a problem. But we know academically that there are really important things that won't fit in a SCORM definition. I mean, reflective practice is arguably the best possible way to learn. Yeah. So where exactly in my SCORM tree am I going to put something like asking you a question about your perception of how emotional intelligence is playing a role in the modern business environment? Your response, there's no place for your response. And even if there were, then do you as an instructor or do any of us as instructors have time to go through all of the information in that response? So we're in desperate need of pre-assessments. We're in desperate need of tools that will acknowledge, recognize patterns, identify, even if they're just pre-screening, and give us a sense of what the kind of core of a response was, and create a kind of rapid recognition solution so that educators, trainers, and the like can all expedite their process of evaluation.
Well,
that
it's
they
interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because in essence, the industries, especially in business, is looking for a cookie cutter answer to create robots so that everybody does exactly the same thing all the time, not really taking into account all the variations.
And at the same time, that's exactly the wrong approach.
Right.
And it's also exactly the not skill that they're interested in. So
and there's one more thing to add to that you're probably getting there. And that's, we're also dealing more and more in a global environment in terms of commerce. We're dealing with a lot of culture, a lot of languages. And both actually play quite a role in learning. Somebody's culture will learn very differently from a different culture. And when you've got a multi-global company, let's say a global bank or a global manufacturing company, what they're learning more and more is, now they're learning, they know this, but they don't know how to deal with it yet. And that is, I have a manufacturing team in China, another one in India. I've got developers in Germany, and I've got my retail stores in the U.S. and Canada. How do we get everybody on the same language and the same boat? Why are we developing this culturally? What's going on? I read an article years ago that the Indians think it's absolutely hilarious because India is the largest developer of or maker of jeans in the world. Almost all jeans come from India. And they think it's absolutely hilarious when they see jeans with holes in them on purpose. That's how they're sold, because that's a style or a and they laugh their head. The cultural differences make for interesting interpretations. And our cultures are very different from, let's say, first, second, third world, whatever you want to call it. And so that's creating training challenges that are pretty large. The gap is large, and it's not getting any smaller right now. They're trying through, some language learning or maybe accent reduction, but that's just the superficial stuff. We're not dealing with the mental. It's just very interesting. And I think you were talking kind of, or getting to that in terms of where things are and how do we get there? I don't think we're going to get there, like you said, but without some help.
Yeah. And that the other aspect of that I think is worth spending some time on is that, the employers are coming back to us saying, hey, decision making, creative problem solving, emotional intelligence, these are our priorities. None of those are things that that you can learn very effectively from a multiple choice test.
No.
They're not the kind of thing that align with the standards that we've historically used. So we have an opportunity here to kind of go into the next gen space. And I think one of the interesting things is that when you combine artificial intelligence, automation, machine learning, and object-oriented structures, say we take a phenomenological approach, there's some interesting approaches where people are doing things like click tracking sequences and recognizing that training people in problem solving by watching the manner and sequence in which they solve problems, and then using that data as a comparative base for the way that other people solve problems and that the way experts solve problems, novices solve problems, all that kind of stuff. Those I think are where there are huge opportunities. And one of the reasons we get bogged down is and the point I was kind of making at the center was we live in this world where it's either reported to an LMS or it's not stored.
Right.
And so all the miraculous things that we were all just loving and playing around with in 1998, like being able to, throw a chat in a course and have our students chat real time and track what that was and do all that kind of, most of those efforts fall away because sooner or later the orgs that are supporting them realize, oh, there's actually a giant cost to storing all this data. And I've got legal concerns. Can I store all this data?
Yeah.
And I've got, interoperations problems. Like, can I let these two people coexist in the same place at the same time? So I think we're in an age of struggle as we begin to define this, because there are things that just practically we can sit here and have our conversation, right? But it's much more complicated for a large corporation to make it possible
Sure.
for us to sit and have this conversation. It's you making it possible for us to have the conversation. And you have a cost that comes along with it, right? So it's I think it's a good example of where we haven't quite kind of cracked the egg there, so to speak, on so to speak. I'm pretty sure that's not an expression.
So do you think so from what you're saying, I'm thinking, are we at one point going to have an LMS capable of storing emotional responses or emotional content?
I think we're already on the edge.
On the edge, right? Yeah.
I think we're right on the edge. I think already with what we have, we could get away with these things, right? So many LMSs have now adopted the Tin Can X API standard for real. If you heard me talk about this 2-3 years ago, I would have told you, yeah, they all say they have X API, but it's fake.
Yeah,
it's basically just SCORM support that's in the X API spec. The whole point of X API was to open up the infinite possibilities, right? To give us multi-part reporting, and suddenly we could report anything we wanted in whatever way we wanted. One of the ways that I've been able to wrap my head around this better is I think we maybe need to stop thinking of it as X API reporting and start thinking of it as the Internet of Things. Because if you think about say a Kirkpatrick model of reporting, we traditionally would say that the level 3 reporting is as good as it gets, and that's when the manager verifies that the employee is in fact doing the behavior that they were trained on some delay ago, some month ago, a month and a half ago, whatever. But in fact, now we have the possibility to say, I taught this person how to do X, and whether it's a camera in the store or a part of the machine or a part of a separate computing system, something somewhere along the pipeline is probably internet enabled and probably can now count and track whatever that behavior was that you were trying to train. So instead of having to go back to the manager, you're now able to actually figure it out for yourself. So if they're manufacturing widgets on the assembly line and the issue was that they made an assembly error every 14th widget, now an assembly line can have a camera monitoring their output, cross-checking it to the individual, cross-checking it against the training that they took, and can determine in real time whether post-training there is a significant improvement in their overall performance of the widget assembly. And not only that, but it can be longitudinal. So you can look at what is the impact of practice, what is the impact, and there's no reason why it couldn't inspire immediate feedback. Worker number 47, you've made 14 errors on the assembly. Please review your assembly process. Training number 4.
Yeah.
Sounds
and if it
scary
gets really
cyber,
bad, the red
doesn't it?
laser just obliterates him. It just
That's right.
Mad Max time. Yep, here we go.
That's right.
But you're right. It's going to be this stuff is actually exciting because it can really bring training to because training right now is flat. Everybody thinks it's not that effective. You hear it all the time when you're working with companies and everything else. Well, we used to do a lot of e-learning, but it sucked. It wasn't any good. They're right. It wasn't. There were things that could have. Now, mind you, the same company is the one who doesn't want to spend the money on it, doesn't want to do anything, and wants everybody trained in 1 week to do 5,000 tasks.
Always the way.
Yeah, so it's there's always that give and take, that balance act of what are we actually doing here? But I think good times do lie ahead, and it's going to be kind of exciting to see where it all falls and how we can make the very difficult a lot easier for everyone. And I think that's
Absolutely.
The kind of stuff you guys are working on. Are you seeing stuff? I know you can't talk about futures too much, but are you seeing thoughts like that going into maybe the development with Prime, for example, as a storage method where you can store that kind of information?
Yeah, so we've expanded Prime to, and I'm sure a lot of other LMS vendors have, to embrace the complete XAPI model and to facilitate easy generation of that. Yeah. The phase we're at now is in the analytics and backend, right? Because unlike traditional LMS data reporting, where you know what the SCORM data is, therefore you can design the tables and charts and all that, and you know what data is coming in, so you can kind of say, well, this is the way I want to depict it. the data coming in through XAPI is always going to be dynamic, right? And how you define it's going to be dynamic, and what it means is going to be dynamic. So that's part of where we see the industry going, is finding a way to provide an easier solution for the dynamic reporting of data that may need to be completely customized. Some of that's fairly complex. The other aspect to it, I think, is even in Captivate, we're seeing those kinds of evolutions begin to become a part of the mainstream conversation, that we're looking much more seriously at what are the spaces that we should be able to occupy, and what are the things that we should be able to automate. This last CP 2019 was interesting through the cycles. We're on the 4th release of 2019, so it's normally we'll do about 2 releases, big releases in a year, and this one, I think it dropped in 2018, and its last one was here now toward the near. Actually, it's not even the last. I think there's another, but the so many releases means a lot of different pieces. And one of the learnings from that was we added these quick start projects. So now suddenly we're kind of trying to feed, in the old days we would feed that in and think, well, we're going to help the non-artist build a course that looks more beautiful. Now our objective is more help the non-expert and the non-artist build a course that's more effective and more beautiful, so that it's there's training in the quick start project that's designed to teach the novice how to build training. And that's, I think, an important kind of jump into that space. But I think that we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg there. I think we should take it further now and say, how else can we help that person who maybe came to the job without substantial instructional design training, but is an expert in their field? How else can we help people who are, as they're attempting to build their training, can we give them the advantage of a computer expert that's helping facilitate that? And then we're also our current exercises are all around, are there ways to expedite the creation of the most common interactions, the most common. So you see a little of that in 2019. We did these things where we learned that most people set up a navigation page, and then they have like 3 branches, and then that a button is revealed to show that they can go from there off to some other place. We completely automated that, so that if you are in that kind of thing, you just name your objects correctly, and then Captivate does it all by itself. I think in the future, we'll look for ways to make it so that you don't need to name anything, that it's just Big Brother watching over your shoulder and figuring out, how can I facilitate what it is that you're trying to do? How can I put an architecture in place to help you? How can I make it easier to make adjustments and that kind of thing? So there's a lot of room for that, I think. There's no reason why an understanding of instructional design principles and the structures that you're probably using to build courses can't be applied to what you're doing in real time and make suggestions about how to accelerate your process.
Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah. So good times ahead.
Good times ahead.
Good times ahead.
Challenges.
We're not going to get bored.
Engineers.
Yeah.
Engineers are never happier than when you present them with an impossible challenge. So very happy engineers.
But you also know engineers don't like change, which is sort of funny. I always thought doctors and engineers hate change. It's like, wait a minute. You're in a changing field. Maybe not so much. The body hasn't changed that much, but that's interesting. Now, this is good stuff. We've been out of time for 20 minutes, but this has been a great conversation, so we just wanted to keep it going. Allen, as always, it's a pleasure to see you and to talk, and I miss these conversations because you really do have some great insights on where the industry is going, where tech is, and you work with one of the largest vendors, so you guys are privy to some pretty cool information of what's coming up, what's happening, and where it's going to go. I was really pretty impressed with what you were talking about with Lightroom and what's going on with Adobe Stock. We're in one of the, I think we get like 2,000 images a month from Adobe Stock. So we're in the higher subscription level, and it's great. It's great. We get most of our stuff from Adobe Stock now, and no lawsuits. Nobody's coming after you. It's a great thing. And the way that you were talking about Sensei analyzing data, it's fascinating. And it makes so much sense because nobody likes writing meta tags. And
that's right.
And how many more can they write instantly? Pretty cool.
That's right. Yeah,
very,
awesome.
Very cool. Well,
Cool.
Alan,
It was so good to see you.
Same here. We're looking forward to seeing you again, and have a great holiday season. It's upon us, almost time, and
Will do.
and thanks for coming on. We have links to the other interview we did with you down there, and we have a link to that position that you have open for another evangelist for the prime.
Yeah,
evangelist.
apply for that. Apply for
Hopefully,
that. I'm looking
hopefully
for that unicorn.
Yeah, you get somebody good soon. And for all you people watching, please subscribe, whatever that does. Give us a hands up, hands down, whatever you feel like, and come back next week, or actually come back tomorrow. Got another interview. Have a good one, everyone. And again, thanks, Alan, for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
And it's a wrap.